What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today is going to be the first day of the new season, so I figured might as well take a deep dive into the new meta, give my predictions for what Pokemon are going to be good, what Pokemon you should be trying out here at the start of this season, and I feel like, honestly, with all the moveset updates that we've had, it's going to be pretty different despite the fact that only a few Pokemon really got tweaked. There's a lot of old favorites that definitely could come back, and Shadow Caesar, Bastiodon, Marowak, a lot of these old Pokemon that I really didn't like in the previous meta, they're going to be gone, or at the very least, much easier to beat. I'm excited to see how this meta is going to shake up, so let's take a look at what I feel this meta is going to be. So at the top here, we have Pokemon that I feel are going to be meta-defining. These are Pokemon that either you need to be able to be using or countering because of how strong they're going to be. Empoleon's a Pokemon that didn't necessarily receive an update, but it did receive access to Marowak as well as Gastrodon getting a nerf, which honestly were some of the only Pokemon that could reliably shut this thing down. Empoleon has access as well to Hydro Cannon and Drill Peck, very good coverage moves, and while Metal Sound is not the best fast move in the game, Water and Steel type is actually a pretty unique and a pretty strong typing in the game. Empoleon's one of those Pokemon that can core break your opponents if they're not ready for it, and even if they are ready for it, just give it a little bit of a shield advantage or energy lead, and that's all it really needs to flip some of its bad matchups. Up next, an old favorite of mine coming back, potentially Shadow Drapion might be a Pokemon here that could be pretty strong with both Caesar as well as Mudsap and I guess Basti as well getting nerfed. A lot of the things that generally gave it a little bit of trouble in previous seasons are going to be going away. I also know that Empoleon, while it is kind of decent into Drapion, saying it does resist Poison Sting, and Metal Sound as well as Hydro Cannon do add up, I was actually looking into it. A single Poison Sting energy lead does win Drapion the Zero Shield matchup, so despite the fact that Empoleon does have some play into Drapion, Drapion is not completely out of luck there, and that's the kind of thing I like to see in a meta, where while it does have counters, Drapion still can fight back. Up next, we have Jellicent, a Pokemon that didn't necessarily get buffed itself once again, but it is one of the few really hard checks here, not only to Annihilate, but also to Empoleon. It's also got really nice neutral play. We have Hex as well as Shadow Ball with that nice 4 Hex to Shadow Ball pacing, and 4-3 pacing to Surf. Honestly, this Pokemon is very hard to take down. There are things in the game that can deal with it, but just in general, if you're not careful, this Pokemon can ramp out of control, and it is one of the few things, as I said, that can rein in some of these other top picks. Annihilate is going to be, I think, a little bit scary. This Pokemon currently is running counter, but in the new season, there's a chance that Low Kick might just be the play. I didn't really think at first that Low Kick would be that big of an update for it, but then I started to look into the matchups, and honestly, Annihilate is going to be a little bit of a nightmare. It's going to play a lot more like Primeape, where you're going to be more energy focused, which I guess is a good thing, right? But the big problem is Rage Fist and Close Combat are so incredibly polarizing. Either you shield a Rage Fist and potentially feel really bad about yourself, or you shield a Close Combat and you feel really good about yourself. There's really no in-between, right? Rage Fist always boosts your opponent's attack stat. Close Combat is going to make it so they lower their defense stat. So if you're fighting against these Annihilates, man, this thing is going to be very hard to take down if you don't have a Ghost type ready to go. Maybe a Pokemon like Wigglytuff, but even Wigglytuff doesn't want to be taking Close Combats. Annihilate being a spammy Pokemon now, potentially with the Rage Fist, means that the Ghost types aren't as strong into it either. It might make it less RPS, but it's going to make it so bait and nuke reliant, it might be a little bit hard to take down, at least very consistently. So that's a Pokemon I'm a little bit worried about here in this next meta. Next up, that was the meta-defining tier, right? Those are Pokemon that are going to just shape the meta. Everything else are Pokemon that are going to have to either be able to play around them or play with these kinds of Pokemon, and that is what the top tier is going to be trying to showcase here. Galarian Moltres is the next one on the list. Honestly, Moltres is a very flexible Pokemon. It does have a little bit of a hard time into Pokemon like Drapion, saying that's so spammy, and it does resist Sucker Punch, but even then, it's not as bad of a matchup as you'd expect. Moltres shuts down Jellicent, it has a lot of play into Empoleon, and a decent amount of play as well into Annihilate, although with Annihilate getting the rework here, it's going to be very bait and nuke reliant once again on how that's going to be. That's just going to be the case with Annihilate if it is going to be running Low Kick rather than counter. Wigglytuff is going to be the next pick, and man, I did not want to put this Pokemon this high up, but here's the thing. Wigglytuff is one of the few Pokemon in the game that can take down Fighting, Dark, Dragon, and Ghost-type Pokemon all in one slot here. Its defensive typing is so utterly insane against most of what is good right now, and it's also got access to moves like Swift, which, I mean, that's not bad pacing with Charm, and Icy Wind utility just makes Wigglytuff all that much more annoying, so I don't think it's going to be going anywhere, especially because Shadow Caesar and Bastiodon both got nerfed, so Wigglytuff is a little bit safer, and just has as many targets as normal here, so I think it's going to be staying in the meta almost certainly. Furret as well, a Pokemon that is very good right now, and I think it's going to be pretty good in the next meta. Another one of those Pokemon that can take down the Ghost types pretty easily. It's got neutral play into Drapion, neutral play as well into Empoleon, and you can run Trailblaze or potentially Brick Break depending on what coverage you want. The next Pokemon that's actually been buffed, though, in this season that I think is going to take very good advantage of this buff is going to be Forretress. This Pokemon did get nerfed with Rock Tomb doing 5 less damage, but honestly, Rock Tomb is still going to be a Sky Attack clone with a guaranteed attack drop. That is still a very efficient attack, and I mean, it's only 5 less damage. I feel like Forretress is not going to feel that as much as other Pokemon, especially with how slowly you were reaching those Rock Tombs in the first place. But what really helps Forretress here in this updated season is going to be access to the newly buffed Sand Tomb. Sand Tomb, if you don't know, is a very bad move in the previous season. It was only 25 damage, which is absurdly small, but it's getting a full 15 damage increase, going all the way up to 40 damage. And, well, again, that's not the best necessarily damage-wise. When you add the fact that it has a guaranteed defense drop, that means Forretress can always lower your opponent's defense and attack, which is a diabolical combination, especially with a Pokemon with a lot of fast move pressure and with that ground and rock coverage. So Forretress potentially could be a little bit annoying, although it doesn't have the best matchups into Pokemon up above it. Annihilate, Jellicent, and Empoleon all have a lot of play into it, although Drapion, definitely pretty good for Forretress. Steelix, though, is another one of those Pokemon that I feel is going to be pretty good in this new meta. Mudslap, keep in mind, it got nerfed. Mudslap was one of the few things keeping these Steel types like this in check, so potentially, Steelix is going to be just a little bit better. It's going to be able to go for those 2-shield shenanigans into Pokemon like Empoleon and Jellicent. It's good into Moltres, good into Furret, good into Forretress, good into Wigglytuff. What can't this thing do? Well, the main thing it can't do is honestly be as consistent in the Zero Shield matchup. A lot of the time, you have to go for Psychic Fangs and Thunder Fangs damage over time, which does mean you have to invest a lot of resources, but Steelix users generally don't seem to mind. They generally do that anyway, so I think Steelix could potentially be a little bit of an annoying pick here, maybe replacing Bastiodon in some people's teams. I guess we'll just have to see. Altaria, another Pokemon that did not necessarily get buffed or nerfed, but it's a Pokemon that's going to be just about as good in the meta as it was. It's got a lot of neutral play here into these Pokemon up at the top. It's got a lot of play into these Pokemon, aside from Wigglytuff, I guess, and Altaria, one of the bulkiest dragon types in the game. It's hard to go wrong with a Pokemon like that. Up next is another Dragon-type Pokemon with Flamethrower coverage. I am honestly, I don't know if I'm overrating this Pokemon or not, but Shelgon looks very interesting to me. If you don't know, they're buffing Shelgon by giving it access to a newly buffed Twister update. Twister is going to either be 35 energy or 40 energy. We don't quite have the numbers on that just yet, but either way, Shelgon is going to take full advantage of it. If you know how bulky Goodra is, that's kind of where Shelgon is sitting right now, and because Dragon Breath plus Twister at worst is going to take 10 turns to reach, at best is going to take 9 turns to reach, as well as that fire-type coverage of Flamethrower. Potentially, Shelgon is going to be the dragon that beats other dragons, and the dragon with play into steels and ice types. That's a very deadly combination, and I feel like this, it might just be my wishful thinking, but I feel like potentially Shelgon could be a very interesting Pokemon in this next update. Licky Licky, I've been using this Pokemon so much. Honestly, you guys have always been saying Licky Licky, it comes on every Team Max and uses. Well, that's just because it is so solid. Well, it doesn't necessarily shut down a lot of Pokemon in the meta. There's not a lot of Pokemon that can shut it down as well. Its ability to be safe, have a lot of spammy damage with Rollout, as well as Shadow Ball and Body Slam, gives it a lot of flexibility. Even though there's Pokemon, such as Annihilate, that do have that fighting type damage, the Ghost type Shadow Ball is insane against them. Licky Licky also has play into Empoleon, despite the Rollouts being resisted because Shadow Ball is such a strong move, and Body Slam only taking 9 turns to reach is kind of insane for a Pokemon this bulky. Up next is Unova Stunfisk, one of those few core breakers that we see to a lot of those top tier mons. We know for a fact that there are less Mudslap users coming through, so potentially you need to rely more on grasses and dragons to shut this Pokemon down instead. And I think Ufisk at this point is going to be a Pokemon that, while it is getting Mud Bomb a little bit reworked, I believe Mud Bomb's going to be 5 more energy and 5 more damage. That is totally fine for it still. It still has spammy discharge. Mud Bomb is still going to be a very efficient attack, and its coverage of electric and ground can be very hard to overcome. Corviknight, once again, one of those Pokemon that I think just into the top tier here, in the meta-defining tier, I should say, looks very strong. You got Sand Attack coverage for both Drapion as well as Empoleon. Payback, potentially, for the Jellicents here. Air Cutter for Annihilate. I think that, while, sometimes Corviknight can be a little bit underwhelming neutrally, it's a Pokemon here that is going to be very hard to take down if you're not able to have a Pokemon like that Ufisk to just shut it down. It's not going to be able to just sweep through a team, but it's also a Pokemon that can disrupt a lot of those common meta cores, and because of that, I think it does deserve a spot here in the top tier. And finally, our last Pokemon in this slot is gonna be a Guzzlord, one of those Pokemon that once again has really risen to prominence recently. It's able to resist all of the damage that Drapion can throw. It resists all the damage from Jellicent as well. Annihilate is actually kind of a funny matchup depending on if you shield close combats as the Guzzlord as well, so potentially playable there, and Empoleon, it's honestly not the best counter to Dragon types in the first place, so Guzzlord, I feel, is also a pretty strong pick. Just watch out for those Fairy types. That is the one crippling weakness of that Pokemon. So those are the two top tiers. I think those are the most common Pokemon we're going to see. Up next, we have a much more broad tier here, right? It's going to be the solid tier, the Pokemon that in general you can definitely use. There's nothing really wrong with them. I'm going to skip through the Pokemon that are, not buffed in this new season, because honestly, there's a lot of Pokemon to go through, and I don't want to bore you guys with Pokemon you already know about, but there are some Pokemon that we definitely do need to talk about. Ninetales we know about, Corsola we know about. Look at this. Galarian Stunfisk potentially coming back in. We just talked about the Unova Stunfisk, which is the electric and ground type version. This is the steel and ground type version, which honestly, I was looking at it. It does make me a little bit sad sometimes with its matchups. Don't look at the Altaria into Galarian Stunfisk matchup. It will make you cry. For some reason, Galarian Stunfisk does not beat it in any even shielding scenario. I guess Dragon Breath still does like 2 damage per turn. You have super effective Flamethrower on Altaria, so that matchup is a little bit scuffed. But Galarian Stunfisk is one of the best counters to Drapion in the game. You have the ability to go for Earthquake as well into Pokemon like Empoleon. You're not ideal into fighting type Pokemon, but with Mudslappers once again getting nerfed, it feels like there is at least some room here for Galarian Stunfisk, especially with Mudshot going back to being a more energy-focused fast attack than having the damage focus that it has right now. Let's see, we have a lot of Pokemon from the old seasons here. Yeah, I mean, a lot of old favorites, but then another Mudshot buff. We're going to see Quagsire. This Pokemon, once again, one of those Pokemon that I used to use so much, and people always gave me crap for it. It's like Axon always uses Quagsire. Once again, there's a reason for that. If I use a Pokemon a lot, it's likely because this Pokemon is extremely flexible. It's a Pokemon that you can safe swap it often, and normally not get hard countered. Hopefully give yourself some play, and that's what it used to do. I'm hoping that's what it's going to do in the current season. The one thing that does kind of scare me a little bit is Quagsire is not getting necessarily buffed past what it used to be. It's just going to be buffed to a point to where it was, right? It's going to be a Pokemon that is going back to what old Quagsire was, and the meta has kind of evolved since then. There's been a lot of power creep, a lot of moves are much more efficient than what Quagsire has. Aqua Tail, it is a decent move, and with Mudshot, it's only 4 Mudshots to reach an Aqua Tail, which that pacing is very quick. That is very amazing for this Pokemon, but it's also like, there's so many moves in the game that are Dragon Breath clones, Shadow Claw clones, Sucker Punch is everywhere right now. Quagsire does have a lot of things that it needs to watch out for, and I do kind of worry that potentially the meta has kind of just gone on without Quagsire, and that might make it a little bit harder, a little bit less consistent to use, but I think that with the coverage of both water and rock type damage, it will be the best of the Mud Boys. We have other ones to talk about here that I'll get to momentarily, but I do think Quagsire, as far as the water and ground type Mudshot users go, will probably be the top tier one, just so it doesn't get walled by Pokemon like Altaria and Jellicent like the other ones just might. Up next is going to be a bit of a different change. Pelipper is going to be coming back. If you guys don't know, Pelipper actually used to be pretty strong in Pokemon Go PvP. The only problem with it recently was Wing Attack was a pretty bad move. They are buffing Wing Attack to be a much better attack. It's going to be the same as what Empoleon uses. It's going to be a Metal Sound clone, which is, I believe, 8 energy, 5 damage per fast move, which, I mean, it's a playable move, right? But what Pelipper really has going for it is not only that, but it also has access to the Weather Wall buff that happened a couple of seasons back. It also has Hurricane, which, I mean, Hurricane's actually a pretty decent move, but it does lead it to some very unfortunate bait and nuke scenarios, kind of like Annihilate, where Annihilate might need to go for some bait sometimes to win matchups. Pelipper is the same way. I was looking at it, and if Pelipper double baits, it can just destroy Altaria. It really wins the 2-shield matchup, but if one of those baits get called, it's a nightmare. So this Pokemon, as long as you're going straight Weather Ball, very fun, very strong Pokemon. But if you have to go for Hurricanes, it can be a little bit hit or miss, but it also is an old meta favorite of mine, and it's a Pokemon that, as long as you're not fighting an Electric type, it has a lot of play into basically anything you're going to see. Yeah, we've seen these ice types here for quite a while now. A lot of Pokemon here, once again, from the old meta. I will go over Carbink for just a second. Necessarily did not get any buffs to it or nerfs directly, but what Carbink does have going for it is Bastiodon got nerfed, which means some people might be thinking Rock-type Pokemon are dead. It also got Mudslap nerfed and Shadow Scizor nerfed, so those are 2 of its worst matchups out of the meta. Same with Bastiodon, right? So I probably should not be bringing this Pokemon up. I don't want people running Carbink, but keep in mind, be worried about Carbink potentially in team building because this Pokemon is still as good as it was. It's a bulky nightmare, a lot of fast food pressure. It's got Moonblast coverage for the fighters. Potentially, people might be reverting to Carbink instead of Bastiodon. Just keep that in mind. Up next, we got the classic Greedent, another one of those Pokemon that takes full advantage of how spammy Mudshot can be now. Just like Quagsire, it only takes 4 fast attacks to reach a Body Slam with Greedent, but Greedent is a little bit more inefficient when it comes to what coverage move you want. Quagsire has that nice coverage option of the Stone Edge, whereas Greedent has 2 options, either Trailblaze for the water types or Crunch for like the steels and potentially the ghost types in the meta. Greedent is in an interesting spot. There's a lot of other normal type options. We have Furret, we have Licky Licky, we have a lot of Pokemon as well with Mudshot, but Greedent in general does have interesting play just as a very spammy Pokemon, as a Pokemon you can use to kind of dance around, stall the switch clock with how quick it is, but I don't know necessarily if it's going to be able to be better than the other normal types we have, but I do think it's going to be pretty playable just because of how quick it is. It will be quicker than Licky Licky, and Licky Licky is already a pretty quick Pokemon, so potentially kind of cool. A little bit less good coverage though, I'd say, so we'll see how it's going to play out. So those are the overview of Pokemon that I think are going to be pretty solid, not quite as spicy as some of the other Pokemon we're going to talk about, but let's get into the next tier here, the viable spice picks, the Pokemon that, you can use them if you like the Pokemon, you want to try to build a team around them. They definitely work, but they might have some Pokemon in the meta they're a little bit scared of. Once again, we're only going to go over the top Pokemon that have been updated in this update. We don't need to go over, I don't know, Blastoise. Blastoise is just the same, but one Pokemon we do need to go over is Wormadam. This Pokemon getting access to Sucker Punch is interesting. Wormadam is in a strange spot. Shadow Seazorb has been nerfed, so there is an opening in the Steel Bug type category, but I think Fortress is probably just going to fill that spot more so than Wormadam. Sucker Punch, though, is a very good move. It's going to make it so Wormadam's a lot more playable into the Ghost types, potentially, than a Pokemon like Fortress, but it's also going to make it a little bit more awkward into the Dark types that Bug types are normally supposed to be good into. And with how slow Wormadam is, it will make it a little bit hard to actually reach charge attacks a lot of the time in the Go Battle League, and Wormadam, it is pretty bulky. It can survive long enough to reach those charge attacks, but I'm assuming the longer the battles go on, the less his Pokemon's going to feel like a very good pick. But down the line, maybe they can buff it and make it a little bit better, but it's also a Pokemon that if you want to try to make work, it's probably possible to have a good time with it. It's just going to need some very good assistance from other Pokemon around it. We got some Wing Attack users here as well, both Pidgeot as well as Golbat. We'll go over Pidgeot first, saying it also got access to Heat Wave getting added to its moveset as well as getting buffed. Heat Wave is going to be interesting. I believe it's going to be a Surf clone in this new season. It's either going to be a Surf clone, which is a pretty good attack, or a Sky Attack clone, and Sky Attack clone would be stupid. I hope they don't do that. But Pidgeot's in this really odd spot where there's a lot of other normal and flying type Pokemon. Even with the unique coverage of Heat Wave, I don't know if it's going to be any better than, say, Fearow. Saying Fearow has just a strict upgrade to its fast move. Peck is a better version of Wing Attack. It's just going to be the same energy, but 1 more damage than what Wing Attack currently is, which means Wing Attack is still going to kind of fall behind what the Peck users can do. Pidgeot does have a bit more bulk. It has access to some interesting moves such as Air Cutter, Feather Dance if you want to lower your opponent's attack, and Brave Bird if you want that nuke potential. But I think Pidgeot's going to be a very hard Pokemon to decide on what moveset you want to run, as well as the fact that it's going to be maybe a little bit less consistent as what Fearow could do. So I think you could use Pidgeot if you want, but personally I'd probably use a different normal flying type, even Toucannon, or Fearow, as I said, would probably be a little bit better, but Pidgeot definitely more playable than it used to be at the very least. Golbat is a Pokemon that I am a little bit interested in because not only is Wing Attack getting buffed this season, last season they buffed Shadow Ball, which gives it a nice coverage move against the Ghost types that normally Poison types do kind of struggle against, but because Wing Attack, as I said, with Pidgeot is not the best move in the game, it will fall behind in fast move damage over other Pokemon. It is going to be using Poison Fang likely as well, which could give it some bait and nuke potential, which I never like it when it's that polarizing of a bait and nuke Pokemon where you got that debuffing cheap attack and then that heavy hitting charge move like Shadow Ball here, but I mean, it does give it some play in the meta. It's a Pokemon that I could see some people trying out, and I mean, it beats Wigglytuff, it beats Annihilate, it has at least some play into Drapion, some play into, what's it called, the Jellicent, if you get baits off at the very least. So, maybe Golbat could be an interesting option, but it's a Pokemon that, once again, is potentially going to fall just short in a lot of other matches because, I mean, Wing Attack, not the best move, once again. Gyarados did get access to Twister. I don't know if you'd run Twister over, potentially just going Crunch still. I feel like you want the coverage of Crunch and Aqua Tail for Gyarados, but, maybe Twister if it's 35 energy. Come back to me on that one. Maybe it could be an interesting idea. Politoed, another one of those classic Water-type Pokemon that had access to Mudshot. It's not quite a Mud Boy in the same sense as Quagsire, saying it's not a ground type itself, but that kind of helps out in some ways. It's going to make it so it's not quite as weak to grass type Pokemon, but it's also going to be weak to electric types, which makes it a little bit harder to use. And Politoed has a lot of nice coverage moves, but what one are you going to run on this thing? Are you going to go Ice Beam and get walled by Water types, or Earthquake and get walled by Altaria? It's kind of a pick your poison kind of Pokemon, but it is going to be pretty efficient with how spammy it can get to those Weather Balls. Only 4 Mud Shots to a Weather Ball once again. That is pretty good pacing, very efficient attack as well. But Politoed might just not have the perfect coverage it needs currently in the meta, but it's a Pokemon that in the future might be kind of good. And another Pokemon I wanted to talk about is going to be Scizor, actually. While this Pokemon is getting nerfed, I do think it is still usable, but it's going to be a lot more RPS, a lot more degen. The whole point of running Scizor nowadays is going to be just to try to bullet punch through people, probably go Trailblaze to ramp up guaranteed. I'm glad that Night Slash is getting that nerf, so it's not going to have quite as many opportunities just to sweep through teams with a 1 in 8 boost chance. Obviously, the boost chance is still there, but it's only going to boost your attack by 1 stage now instead of 2, so hopefully Shadow Scizor is going to be a little bit less difficult to deal with. Swampert, another one of those Mudshot users, but this is another one of those Pokemon. You have to pick what you're going to get walled by. If you run Sludge as well as Hydro Cannon, you end up getting walled by Jellicent. If you run Earthquake and Hydro Cannon, Altaria walls you. So I think that Swampert, it's way more playable than it was, once again, but it's going to be a Pokemon that I don't think has the flexibility to truly make itself work in this meta, but it will be much better than it was before, having 5-4 pacing to Hydro Cannon at the very least. A lot of other old Pokemon. Whiscash, another Mud Boy, but it's like, they nerfed Mud Bomb in this update too, so it doesn't even have good pacing. It's just straight 5s to reach Mud Bombs. It has Blizzard coverage. That's the one unique thing about Whiscash now, but I think Whiscash is probably just going to be one of the less ideal Mudshot users, Mud Boys in this next meta, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I like Whiscash. It's playable. If you want to use it, give it a go, I guess. Medicham, I love Medicham. I don't think it's amazing in this next meta, but I feel like it is playable. Medicham is going to be on Psycho Cut now, rather than Counter as its fast move, and it's going to be running Dynamic Punch instead of Psychic as its charge attack. So basically, its fast move and its nuke move got swapped with its typing. So it's going to be an interesting Pokemon, to say the least. It's going to be very spammy to those Dynamic Punches, only 5 Psycho Cuts to reach your Dynamic Punch, and you're going to have some real fast move pressure, at least a little bit better fast move pressure than you currently had, saying Psycho Cut is getting the Thunder Shock treatment, which means it's going to get a decent damage increase. Potentially it's going to help out in some matchups, but Medicham's one of those Pokemon that I struggle to see what it really hard counters in the meta. Even Empoleon, the premier Steel type in the meta, is going to have access to Drill Peck, as well as Metal Sound, which is going to do more fast move pressure to you than you're doing to it. Only way you win that matchup is if you land a Dynamic Punch, so if they ever catch a move, or if they're ever up a shield, Medicham is going to feel kind of useless in that situation, and I feel like Annihilate might just be the better fighter even still, but that doesn't, take away from the fact Medicham is going to be much more playable now, and potentially still an alright pick if you're a Medicham enthusiast, and for some reason want to try to make it work. Bastiodon got nerfed, but it's not going to go away. It's going to be a lot less common, though, so hopefully it's not going to be as annoying. Gliscor, technically triple buffed, actually. Wing Attack, Sand Tomb, as well as Acrobatics. Very cool Pokemon, but it's gonna basically just be a flying type Pokemon that loses even harder to ice types. It also loses pretty hard to water types because of that. And Sand Tomb, not the best ground coverage move, so you're not even a flying type that has a lot of good play into steel types or anything. You end up just being in a spot where, once again, you're kind of bait and nuke reliant. You got Wing Attack to charge your Sand Tombs kind of quickly, but then you have Acrobatics, which you kind of need to land against a lot of Pokemon to do any real damage, and that can make it a little bit awkward, but it is a Pokemon that is very unique in what it does, so maybe people can make it have play. Gastrodon got nerfed. Good riddance. I think that it's much worse here than potentially Marowak could be. We see Cresselia also getting that Psycho Cut buff, but I think Cresselia, a Mono-Psychic type Pokemon that gets hard-walled by Steels, hard-walled by a lot of top Pokemon. Astonish is in the game, Sucker Punch is in the game. There's a lot of things that have been added in that makes it so much harder to use Cresselia. Fortress destroys it. I feel like Cresselia is just not in the right spot here in this meta. Technically, you could use Mudshot Digger Speed, but then you get walled even harder by flying-type Pokemon, so I don't know if that's a good idea. You have Low Kick on Hawlucha, which means that you have straight 5 pacing to Flying Press being one of the best moves in the entire game. That's about all it's got going for it, though, is mono fighting type coverage, basically. You have Aerial Ace or X Scissor, but man, X Scissor coverage doesn't help against the ghost types or the fairies, and Aerial Ace honestly doesn't either, despite the fact that it is neutral into them. It's just a really bad attack, so, I mean, Hawlucha is kind of a cool pick, but I don't see it being, like, a really strong Pokemon. Let's see, Night Slash getting nerfed for Thievul, whatever. That was not what made Thievul even remotely playable in the first place. Flamigo, also getting the Wing Attack buff. I believe it's Wing Attack, Brave Bird, and Upper Hand, which is actually a remarkably good moveset. The one bad thing for Flamigo, though, is it is pretty squishy. It's around, like, Primeape level of squishiness, so it's going to be a Pokemon that I feel like if you're a Flamigo fan, you could make that work, but it's not going to be super consistent, and it's a Pokemon that potentially is just going to get outclassed by other Pokemon, either in the flying or the fighting type role. But, I mean, honestly, it could be kind of an interesting Pokemon. It's got very efficient attacks. And then we got the last two tiers here. These are Pokemon that, I mean, the Crazy Spice roll, you could probably make an argument for making them work. But then the garbage roll, don't try this Pokemon, don't try this at home. We have, in the Crazy Spice here, Noctowl, it got that Wing Attack buff, right? But Noctowl is in such an awkward position. Either you're going to be running double Ghost Charge attacks if you want to have good pacing and a good nuke move of Nightshade as well as Shadow Ball, or you have to either sacrifice Shadow Ball, which is your best and most efficient attack, for Sky Attack, which is much less efficient, or you have to sacrifice your bait move of Nightshade and run double nukes. So it's in a spot where it doesn't really have any moveset that feels good to run. Do you have no coverage? Do you have no pacing? Do you have no good nuke move? That's going to be the big question on Noctowl. And once again, I feel like there's just so many other flying type Pokemon that can fill the role better than Noctowl that even with this buff, I don't see it being that good. Togetic getting access to Heat Wave as a buff is pretty nice as well, but despite it being a pretty bulky flying type Pokemon and a pretty bulky fairy type as well, Heat Wave is not necessarily what is gonna just push it into the limelight here. Togetic already has a lot of very efficient attacks. It's got access to Psyshock, it has Dazzling Gleam, it's got some nice coverage already, right? But it's still, it just is a little bit underwhelming in neutral matchups. Fairy Wind, while it is a decent attack, it's not doing a lot of fast food pressure. Dazzling Gleam, which is your best stab attack, is still, a little bit hard to reach. If your opponent shields a Dazzling Gleam, that's a lot of damage down the drain. So you're going to be reliant a lot of the time on Heat Wave, and while that is a good move, it's non-stab damage, there are quite a few things that do resist Fire type in the meta, so we'll see what it can do. It's not quite as good as Togekiss is when it comes to taking down Empoleon as well, because you don't have Aura Sphere coverage, but I mean, it's a Pokemon that you could maybe try to make work. A lot of other Pokemon that didn't necessarily get buffed or nerfed, but are technically in the top 100 of PvPoke, so we'll just go past them. I just don't have faith in any of these Pokemon. And then, of course, the garbage tier. Mantine. If Aerial Ace didn't get nerfed a season or two ago, it would honestly probably be a lot higher than this. But it's not going to be spammy at all to reaching these Aerial Aces. While it is bulkier than Pelipper, it's just going to be a lot less impactful. I don't see it having a lot of play. Swalot has Mudshot, so that's kind of cool, but it's also running Ice Beam and Sludge, which gets hard-walled by any Steel type in the game, also walled by Jealous, and walled by a lot of things. And I don't see it really being that good of a Pokemon. It could be kind of funny, being a little bit quicker, but I'm not a big fan, I'm going to be honest. Let's see, what else do we have that got nerfed in this season, or buffed, or, whatever. We had Toedscruel and Gligar. I guess it's our final two Pokemon to talk about. Toedscruel, its only thing that it had going for it was a Mudslap user that beat all the other Mudslap users. Well, first of all, Mudslap got nerfed, so it's kind of sad about that, but also Mudslap got nerfed, so all of its things that it was trying to beat also aren't going to be in the meta as much, so Toedscruel went from, kind of funny niche pick to just, it has no reason to exist. And Gligar, statistically just going to be worse than Gliscor, and I don't even think Gliscor is that good, right? I talked about that flying in ground rather, not the best typing in the game. Wing Attack is good that they're buffing it, but they have still taken everything from Gligar. They nerfed Night Slash this season. They nerfed Aerial Ace and Dig a while back. It's gonna make it so Gligar, despite having its pacing back a little bit, that's not what it needs. It needs everything. It needs a nuke move. It's got to have a better fast move. Honestly, Wing Attack still not the best fast move in the game anymore. It's been kind of power crept out of the meta just in the first place, and a single buff to Wing Attack is not going to bring it back, at least not in my opinion. So yeah, that's the idea I have on what the meta is going to look like here. I feel like there's going to be a lot of Pokemon that are going to be similar to what this last season was, but there's also going to be a lot of those Pokemon that used to be good that are going to come back. We have the Quagsires, the Metachamps, potentially Galarian Stunfisk. We'll have to see how these Pokemon are going to fare in this next season. I'm going to be interested to see because honestly, a lot of these Pokemon I haven't been able to use for a long time, and I like a lot of them. On paper, I feel like it's going to be a pretty fun season. The Fast Pressure Pokemon got nerfed. A lot of the Pokemon that potentially did need a little bit of love, got some buffs, so I'm pretty happy with this update. I'm excited to see how this is going to go. So yeah, let me know how you feel about this new meta. Do you think that any of these tier listed Pokemon are listed correctly or incorrectly? Let me know if there's any changes you would make to this, because honestly, well, I do think I have a decent grasp on the meta. There are some updates that I'm not sure on how they're actually going to impact things, so I'd love to see what you guys are thinking as well. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.